In this video, I'm going to share with you an idea and really a question that came to me the other day while I was meditating. So what I'm going to do is pose this question to you, present it, and then what I want you to do is post your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, your philosophy below in the comments section. And hopefully together we can really crack the code on this and together further our collective knowledge so that I can help or I can understand it more, as well as perhaps you might be able to understand it more as well. So essentially the question that came to me and that popped into my mind and arose as a result of the meditation was essentially, what is the difference between our everyday thoughts and our interpretations of situations and our imagination? So for example, what would be our everyday thoughts? What would be our interpretation of situations? Essentially, something happens to us, someone says something to us, we're going through the course of our day, and in our head we're telling a story, and positive, negative, good or bad, that story may or may not be. So someone might do something to us, we might say, oh, this is awesome. Someone might do something to us, we might say, oh, it's the worst thing ever, leave me alone. But on the other hand, there's our imagination, which we use for things that are just completely made up and fabricated, which in the moment we realize that we're making them up and we're fabricating them. Much like a dream, and something really absurd is happening, we're running around with eight-legged unicorns or dragons or things that we see and recognize as being figments of our imagination or creations of our imagination, creations and results of our creative processes. So my question is, what's the real difference between these two things? Our everyday, day-to-day thoughts where we think such and such person is this way and we think the world is this way. We think, the world is based on Newtonian physics and Aristotelian logic and Euclidean geometry. But at the same time, we know that unicorns and dragons and these kinds of things, are just made up, or things that exist in our imagination. Or we might be in a dream and we might be living in a foreign land, or just draw something on a piece of paper that we just made up basically. And we realize, oh, this is made up, this is part of our imagination and a result of our creative process. So really, what is the difference between these two, and how do we even determine the difference? So that's what I want you to think about, and it's something I've been thinking about just over the past couple of days and just kind of wrestling with and really trying to just look at the mind from that point of view. Now, what else I wanted to say is, how do we know which one is more real? How do we know our interpretation of a situation and our evaluation of a person, place, or thing is any more real than our imagination or something we just create and imagine in our mind or through creative visualization or daydreaming or whatever. Now, that's essentially the question. So what I want you to do, post your thoughts, your comments below. We can go back and forth and converse and dialogue about this. So what I want you to keep in mind, a couple key principles to keep in mind while you really think about this and give me your answers, is that really with any situation, there's typically an infinite amount of interpretations that can be had as a result of it, from the subjective point of view of an individual who has a certain neural net or a certain point of reference for a given situation. Now, one example is, I say the word love to you, and to you it fires off a whole host of different associations than it has for me. If you're in a great relationship, you're going to think love is an awesome, amazing, positive thing. If you're in a terrible relationship, you're going to think it's really not that great. If you're single, you're going to have one interpretation. If you're married, you're going to have another, and vice versa. So that's just one particular instance, where another instance would be, we go out and we look at the sun. To one person, it's a nuclear furnace. To another person who's more spiritual, it's, the sun, the source of life, and essentially what all life on the planet is really relying upon. To another person, it's a bunch of angels singing, and it's this glorious magical thing. And then to another person, it's just purely this equation that they write out, and that's all that it is. And that's just another example of how we can look at something and have an infinite, seemingly amount of interpretations and ways of looking at it. Last example is, you take 10 people and they all watch, a 10-second clip of, say, a movie. what you're going to get back is generally going to be 10 different interpretations, 10 different people noticing 10 different things, and having 10 different stories about the one story, but it's just the one story. So with that first concept in mind, the second is tying into that is contingent and really relying on that, and it's essentially the map is not the territory. So basically what that means is the words that we use to describe things aren't actually the things. Now, essentially this misunderstanding and this not grasping this essential concept is what causes a large degree of problems in our day-to-day life. Because like I referred to earlier, we as humans, we have different references for situations, for stimuli. We have different responses. So two people, are talking about essentially the same thing. They're talking about the same reality. They're talking about the same date and time, the same intersection of the space-time continuum. So it's essentially what they're talking about, but one person might say, oh, this was awesome, the other person say, oh, it was the worst thing ever. Or they might say, it's 60 degrees outside, but from a person who came from, Florida, they might think, oh, this is kind of cold. The person who just came from like Antarctica or, the Arctic, they might think, oh, this is the warmest thing ever. So really, the things that we're using to describe things, the words, the nouns, the adverbs, aren't actually the existential thing. It's kind of like the menu is not the meal. And what happens is we as humans forget that. We as humans forget that we are the ones that invented the words. We are the ones that created all of the symbols. Meaning you don't go out in nature and see, inches or yards or feet. You don't go out in nature and typically find words wild. You don't just go out and pull a wild word out of the ground. No, it's because we invented it as a result of our ability to form symbols and just develop that capability of consciousness, which has the side effect of leading us to think that we're better, we're more intelligent, we're more evolved, we're more all of these other things that lead us to think that we're superior to everything else in reality, whether that be plants, animals, minerals, elements, whatever it is. It's just something that we kind of buy into as humans. So the last example for this to illustrate it is that the element of water. We have this word for water, but the word water will never quench our thirst. So on one hand, we can have a glass of water, and it's actually the stuff that's in the cup that's going to nourish us and quench our thirst. It's never going to be the water, it's never going to be the H2O, it's never going to be the equations or the chemical analysis or any of the things that we have to talk about it. Not ice, not snow, not sleet, not rain, not water, not steam, not all these different ways of describing the same thing, only the actual existential form of water. The thing that all these words are pointing at is the only thing that's actually going to nourish us and quench our thirst. And in Zen, they have a way of describing this in that they say words are essentially just a finger pointing at the moon. But what we do, rather than looking up at the moon, we look at the finger and admire it and say, wow, it's pretty awesome, we're pretty cool, how many different ways can I look at the finger, how many different ways can I describe it, how many colors can I put on it, how many gloves can I put on it, how amazing is it, it's so big, it's so large, and blah blah blah. But we don't even actually look up, oh wait, that's actually what we were pointing at, that's actually the point of the whole thing. We're not able to just grasp it and actually step through the net and step through the limitation of words and logic, which is really a huge burden, because all day we're carrying around just stories on top of stories on top of stories on top of stories, and just like basically a suitcase or a huge train of luggage by the time we get older of just symbols and words and ways of talking about words and ways of talking about the same thing in all these different ways, and it just really weighs us down because we don't actually ever break through that linguistic or symbolic way of looking at the world to actually see the world, to actually experience reality, to actually see the thing that the words are describing, and to actually be nourished and hydrated and have our thirst quenched by the actual water. So again, a lot of things that came to me in meditation recently, things that in the past I really had worked a lot on, and then basically moved away from it, got into other things, and now starting to meditate again, revisiting many things and feeling good about it, feeling excited about it. And so the question, essentially to recap, is what is really the difference between our everyday thoughts and stories and interpretations and evaluations of events, and what is the difference from that between our imagination and just our creative thoughts, which we know to be our own creation and, you know, imagination slash invention. So what I want you to do is post your comments, your thoughts below, even if it's trivial, even if it's profound, whatever it is. Share it. We'll go back and forth. We'll dialogue. We'll converse and be better because of it. So if you have any questions or comments, definitely post them below, and I'll talk to you soon.